Hello, and welcome to the Hybrid School Builders Podcast. I am your host, Rebecca Foley, and I am so glad you are joining me today. I am a fellow grassroots founder who is hoping to make your journey toward founding a sustainable hybrid school a little bit easier. If you are dreaming of starting a hybrid school, or perhaps you've already gotten started, you are in the right place. Join me as we dive into real stories, practical tips, and hard-won lessons that I have learned to help you launch and grow your program with confidence. Remember, building a hybrid school is not just about creating a business or creating jobs. It's not even about just serving the children who attend the program. It's literally about reshaping the landscape of education, and we can do that one community, one entrepreneur, and one program at a time.
So I wanted to talk a little bit more about your budget and your planning budget. Now, it's very important that you have a really good handle on all of your budget categories before you get started with anything, okay? So what I recommend doing, accept your market validation. You can work on your market validation and making sure that there's people out there who actually want your service. But even that, they're going to want to know how much it's going to cost. So you need to be getting a good handle on your budget early on so that you can give them at least a very close ballpark figure for your tuition. Okay. So your budget is very, very important. Now, a lot of programs, especially micro schools that I have seen, are having a hard time being sustainable because I think what's happening, this is my observation, a micro school that's meeting 3 or 4 or more days, a lot of hours, and is being run usually by one person, maybe with 1 or 2 other people, is having to charge quite a bit of tuition. And especially if you're in a state where there's no sort of tax reimbursement or ESA or anything like that, like Pennsylvania does not have any of that yet, it's expensive. And so even though you may not need that many kids, maybe you only need 6 or 8 kids or something to like make everything work, you're doing a lot of work as a teacher to run this program and take care of these kids and teach these kids. And you've got supplies and curriculum and paperwork and all these things you have to do. And so you need to make a salary and you need to pay all these expenses. And if you have a very small program, it costs more per child. And so I think what's happening is there seem to be a lot of people who they're not paying themselves, or they're not paying themselves enough. And I have an episode about paying yourself. And essentially all I say there is make sure that your budget includes paying yourself and that you have a tuition number. So you add up all those expenses, you pay yourself what you know you're going to need in the long term to keep this going. And then set a tuition number that covers all of that. You understand what your cost per student is and how many students you need. And you know where that money's going to come from, whether that's a combination of tuition and fundraising or whatever other, maybe grants or something, but you can't really rely on getting grants. And you make sure that you understand your budget. It's just really important for sustainability. So let me go through just things that you want to make sure are in your budget. I don't think it needs to be too complex. We're going to start with just your facility, okay? So when you first get started, I'm not going to include these things like filing your paperwork with the state, which is, might be $100 or $200, and like consulting calls when you first start, because those are like one-time startup expenses, even though you can pay those. If you have to pay those out of pocket, put the money in your business bank account, write yourself a receipt, okay, and then pay out of the bank account for those things. And then you can reimburse yourself later. Make sure you leave a paper trail for everything. Okay. But I'm not going to include those in the yearly budget because they're generally one-time expenses when you're first just setting up. Okay. So you've got your facility, which is going to be probably your rent. And I really recommend having a cleaning budget, okay, which may be wrapped up in your rent or not, but make sure that you're thinking about that and you have a realistic number for how much it's going to cost. Okay. Those are the biggest facility costs, but you also are going to have like your setup, like your furnishings. Like you may need some bookshelves, you may need some tables and chairs. Hopefully they're things that are going to last you for several years, but they're not insignificant. I will tell you, when we first started, we were literally buying stuff off of Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. And one parent picked up a table and chairs on the side of the road, and we all sat there in the parking lot and washed it off, and it was in fine shape, and that was free. And we used that our first year for kindergarten. And, we picked up a lot of stuff, thrifted our first year because we didn't have hardly any money yet. And that's fine, but it's also time consuming. You have to make your decision on how you're going to manage that. But that can be an expense in the beginning. But even as you move forward, it's better to just put that in your budget so that you have something set aside for that. Because even if you have to kind of thrift things in the beginning, it may be beneficial to you to have the right equipment and the right things that fit in the rooms that do the job they need to do. And eventually, even if it's not the first year, you want to be able to get those things. This is also, if you're a nonprofit, a good thing to run a fundraiser for, because you can run a fundraiser, say you need to raise $1,500 or something to buy bookshelves for the classrooms, locking cabinets or, a table and chairs or something. And people can see the direct benefit of like, oh, they're a startup program and they're running this fundraiser, and then they get this set amount of money, and then it's clearly a benefit to the program, but it's not going to be a recurring expense. Okay, so anyway, furnishings, rent, and cleaning are your facility costs. Okay, you're also going to have to pay insurances every year. You're going to have to pay some kind of professional or directors and officers insurance. You're going to have liability insurance on your kids. You probably want to have some property insurance, like renter's insurance, just for your items that are in the building. And you're likely going to have to pay workers' comp insurance. It depends on your state, for employees. I'm not going to go into all the numbers right here. I have a whole budget breakdown in my planning course on my website where I talk about all of these with actual numbers. But those are things that you need to make sure that you have in your budget, okay? You're also going to have like your technology infrastructure, like your bookkeeping software. If you use like QuickBooks, you have to pay for that service. I think Wave Apps is still free. You're going to have a website that's probably going to need to have some domain registration and the website fee. You're going to have to pay an accountant every year to do your taxes. You're probably going to have to pay for a payroll service if you have employees, and you're going to have bookkeeping, okay? So these things add up. Some of them might be the things that you can wear that hat yourself, and with just a little education, you could do it yourself the first year, but then you probably want to hire it out. So I would recommend putting it in the budget from the beginning. And if you're not getting your full enrollment your first year, which sometimes happens that first year as you're building your reputation and your word of mouth is growing and all of that, you might, have to do some of these things yourself, as long as you can do it legally and all of that the first year, but put it in your budget from the beginning that it's stuff you want to hire out as quickly as you can so that the number is accurate and you're setting your tuition at the right number to cover these expenses, okay? The other thing in that category is probably some sort of admissions student information platform that has tuition and billing capabilities, that has ability to like organize the students' information so you can like print it out, and has ideally some sort of like form sign up thing where you can create a form and people can fill it out to sign up for things, or they can sign waivers. They can sign like a code of conduct and all of that. Like it's made for that, okay? Again, this is something that your first year when you're really small, I think that our first year when we had like 20 kids, which was maybe a dozen families, I didn't even invoice tuition. I don't really recommend that, but I don't think I even sent invoices. People filled out a form, I think a Google form, and we printed out from like a Google Excel sheet, and they just handed me checks. I don't think I even had a box in the hallway, which I needed to do because I would be walking around with a stroller and trash bag and someone's check in my back pocket. That was how it went the first year. And that's okay. When you're smaller, that's fine. I would recommend having a little box set out and using something like Wave Apps and just sending invoices. But you can also just use paper forms when you're small. That's okay. Or Google Forms, which is free. And print things out like that. It's very manageable to do that and like manually invoice people manually, like through Wave Apps or QuickBooks or whatever. Wave Apps is cheaper than QuickBooks. You can totally do that the first year. So that's, again, a place where you can cut your expenses your first year when you're small, but put the expense in so that your tuition is covering. And then eventually you get to a place where you have the students, the enrollment, you have the tuition at the right place, and you can hire these things out. Okay. And this is assuming you're going to be growing. If you're going to stay really small, you may not have to put this in, up to probably 30 to 40 kids. I was manually invoicing right up till about 60 kids. And it was okay. It was doable. But again, I had someone else managing the teachers and the curriculum and all of that. It wasn't just me doing all of that. If it had been me, it would have been too much and I would have wanted to hire it out earlier. Okay, so put it in your budget. That's what I'm saying. Put it in your budget. And then always build in a little extra, a few $100s at least in your budget, just so if you come across some sort of service that would make your life way easier, save you a ton of time, you have it in the budget. You have a little bit of wiggle room, okay? Now, your other big category is going to be pay and salaries, but another big category is like supplies and curriculum, okay? And this is going to be things like office supplies and printing. Do not underestimate the cost of printing. If you're going to have a printer there, or you're going to go get things printed, or you're going to let your teachers have access to a printer, you don't really need like a professional rental printer until you're quite large. You can get away with like a small business printer, probably. Those rentals are not cheap at all. But you can use, you could buy a $500 like small office printer, and that will do the job if it's just 2 or 3 teachers in the beginning. But you want to build that expense in, and then as you get larger and you get more enrollment, you can increase that budget category, but just put it in there. Office supplies, buying the paper, just have office supplies in there. And that's like centrally kind of shared things for the whole school. Then you have like classroom supplies. If you have any kind of like art and science classes that take extra, I would separate those out. I used to separate those out because classroom supplies was like every teacher had a specific budget just to like have things around in the classroom that they wanted to have. But then the teachers who were doing a lot of science experiments or nature study things, like a lot of hands-on stuff or crafting sort of things, or if you're doing a lot of projects, you can lump that in with classroom supplies. But I like to separate it out because some teachers would do more of it than others, and certain grades would do more of it than others. And it was just easier for me to see where the money was going. I talked about equipment and furniture as far as like furnishing the building, and put that under facilities. And then you have your actual curriculum. Okay. So hopefully as you're, zeroing in on your mission and vision for your program, you're doing some research. And this is why it's important from the beginning that you understand what subjects you're covering, what your philosophy is going to be. And the curriculum you have to purchase for your school days. Now, to clarify, you can use whatever policy you want, but we would have all our curriculum that our teachers were using at school purchased by our budget as a school. But then our home days, the homeschool days, the parents were purchasing their own work for that, okay? Their own books for that. So they still had to buy some of the curriculum that was used, all of the curriculum that was used at home, but they didn't have to buy the curriculum that was used at school, okay? And that, again, depends on what your program actually looks like. But we wanted our teachers to have some teacher manuals and, the books that they were reading to the kids. And as you rotate through, hopefully a lot of this is able to be reused in future years, but make sure that you have that. This is also an area where you may be able to get like a grant if you're a nonprofit. There was some smaller grants we got that just help us get like a classroom set of books that was expensive, or like an atlases, or, things that were nice to have, but we could get along without them. Eventually we were able to get some grants to help with that without building it into the budget. Again, if you're trying to keep it affordable, you don't want to go overboard with all of the it'd be great to have all of this stuff. And then you have this huge curriculum budget, which would be great, but it's just like driving up your costs. So you have to use wisdom on that. Okay. Now your salaries is your other big thing. Again, this is why it's important to understand your vision. You have to understand where you're going with this. I like to say about 3 years. What is your vision for 3 years out? And then kind of work backwards. So what might it look like your first year, but you're heading toward your third year? You want to know what kind of staffing you need. You want to make sure you're paying yourself. You want to make sure that you're hiring out the support that you need. You make sure your teachers are getting paid fairly, okay? And then don't forget your taxes, because these people are employees and you have to pay employer part of your taxes, and it's not insignificant. It's close to 10% of your salaries. So put that in your budget, okay? So you really want to make sure that you understand what all of those positions are going to be, how many hours roughly they're going to be working. I'm building out some roles and responsibilities and organizational structure, which may sound overboard to you when you only have a couple of teachers. And maybe it probably is. I didn't develop this until we were quite large. But it was very helpful for me to be able to break down all the different positions and all the different jobs, even if it was only like 2 hours a month. Like the person who planned field trips, like I'm just going to put that as their own little roles and responsibilities, so that I know if I ever want to just hire out this one job, like this one piece, I just want someone to take care of field trips. Okay. It's 2 or 3 hours a month. I have a little sheet of paper that says, this is this job. It's 2 or 3 hours a month. I'm going to pay this person $50 a month or $75 a month or whatever, to like plan out a monthly field trip and then go to it. And I'm developing those. Those will be in my Build It course, the second course, the implementation course. I'm still naming it. Those will be in there, the templates for that. It's just helpful to have that built out so that you don't get along the line and say, oh man, I really wish I had someone overseeing all of this whole thing, or I wish I could hire this out and I didn't put it in my budget. Now, another thing that I really think you should put in is things that are like training for yourself, for your teachers, for your board. There's also, I have this under training, but I don't know where else to put it, but it's like morale stuff for your teachers, like Christmas gifts or like a teacher appreciation brunch or things like that, which in the beginning, our first few years, this was not budget item, but we would still try to do little things like that for the teachers. And then once we ended up with like a dozen teachers and then 15 and then 20, it was like really adding up. So I was like, I gotta make sure I put this in the budget. So then I put it in the budget. But it's really helpful. It's not really that much money, once you get a little larger, it's a few $100s for the year. But it's just nice to be able to have something set aside to do that for your teachers and for your other staff. I think we would do a brunch once or twice a year, or you might do a Christmas party, or you give them a Christmas gift or an end of year gift, some, little, not big unless you have all sorts of money, but just something to help them know they're appreciated. And then you can either build this into your salaries or you could separate it out, but you want to be able to train your teachers and you want them hopefully to get reimbursed for that to some extent. Okay. So either they're getting paid well enough that they understand that they have to come in for training. It's part of their agreement that they're in there for in services or whatever. But if you're doing any kind of like new teacher training or, one-on-one training for a particular grade or subject, if you have just a little bit, it doesn't have to be their full teacher pay either. It can be like a lower rate, like a training rate or a stipend or something. If you have that in there, again, it helps with morale and it just helps you maybe not feel as bad about asking them to come and do trainings, because and again, this is all part of the quality of your program, is you want to make sure that everyone's prepared and the communication is there and the teamwork is there, and it makes you not feel as bad if you're paying for people, depending on who you are. Some of us feel bad asking for people to come in during the summer and not paying them. Okay. Professional development is also, and again, this is something I did not have in the budget in the beginning, but if you can work it in there even a little bit, put it in there as a line item, and then later you can increase the amount as you have a little more wiggle room in your budget. Professional development, like you may want a leadership. I mean, what you're doing, if you go buy my course, which isn't that expensive, that would be a form of professional development, training for yourself. You might want to go to a conference, leadership conference, or we were able to send some of our teachers and staff to a Charlotte Mason conference one year, which was really nice for you as a leader. If you've got gaps in your, I've never led people before, I've never managed people before, or you just want more training on your philosophy or something, having a professional development budget can be really helpful for your long-term sustainability and quality, okay? If you have a board, please train them from the beginning. Again, doesn't have to be a $10,000 consultant who comes in. That's for large organizations. I have a little board training also that I've been developing that's very affordable. Carol Top has something that's $25, right? Something for that. But also if you have to have them do like a vision day, like a Saturday or something, your board members aren't getting paid, but having maybe breakfast and lunch, maybe bringing in a speaker, giving a stipend to someone who's maybe worked on a board before or, been a school operations person before. Like if you want to bring in someone who's a specialist to come and talk to somebody, and you could give them a little stipend for it. Okay. So those are my budget categories. I just like having a miscellaneous category that has nothing in it except just a number, so that any surprises we have, or if I underestimated one of these categories, I don't feel like, I have no idea where it's coming from. Okay. Then I always recommend running at least a 10%, if not 15 to 20% cushion. So once you have all those numbers added up, you add them up in your little Google Sheets or your Excel sheet, add it up, see your total number, and then, 1.15 times that number. And that's the number you actually want to operate off of. Okay. And that's building in multiple levels of cushions, but keeping it moderate, keeping it reasonable. But you just want to have those in there. If a family drops out in the middle of the year, or you lose a student, or something else happens, you have an unexpected expense, you just don't want to be like right down to the very last penny. Okay, so those are your budget categories. Again, I have more about this on my course, an actual breakdown in a template that you can use. But I just wanted to talk through the things that you want to make sure you have. And I also gave you some advice on what to do if you're in your first year and you have to kind of tighten your belt until you fill all your classes. Some of the ways that you can cut some expenses that first year when you're first getting going. Thanks so much for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe and make sure you check out the resources I am developing at startahybridSchool.com. Send me an email anytime. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.